So, Eric, I think we are good and live right now.
We're live right now.
Uh,
I think
so the host unmuted your mic. So I think you are good to go, Eric, to get us started.
All right. Well, thank you for registering and listening into another session of Chopping It Up by Green Cabbage. I'm Eric Cunningham. I'm the founder and chief client officer of the company. And today is a critical subject that we wanted to make sure that our listeners and give them some reminders of this. And it's really about investing in your team. And you'll learn more about what I mean by investing in your team. I'm joined today by two experts that are going to help with this discussion. Andrew Oslowski, who is an executive director and leads the training and education practice here at Green Cabbage, and Wesley Schnell, who is our chief legal officer. Wesley is in Brazil right now. Andrew is ready for Purdue basketball, and I am in beautiful Western Pennsylvania. So Andrew's going to do most of the talking here, and we're really excited about this. But ask yourself these two questions. When's the last time you've been through training? How sharp are your skills? And then ask yourself the other question. Actually, it's more of a comment. It's how sharp is the rest of your team that works around you as well, too. So I'm going to kick things over to Andrew. He's going to lead this discussion, and we look forward to your feedback. Andrew.
Great. Thank you very much, Eric. So we'll test the keys, and it appears that everything's working. So I've spent, as Eric said, I'm here specifically to help with education and training, but I've spent the last 12 years helping clients achieve better deal outcomes. And the bulk of that has been focused on training, but I also act as a subject matter expert. And that's kind of what I'm drawing on from what we're going to have from a conversation today. Because prior to that last 12 years, I spent almost 20 years on the supplier side of deals, selling to organizations like are on this call. And my goal was I was getting trained on running a sales process to drive the most revenue possible to benefit my employer. So it's important to remember, because that's the perspective that I'm bringing. While I was on the supplier side, it was not my job to give people good deals. It was my job to drive revenue, and that was what I was being trained to do. So to start our conversation today, we had posted some things online. We threw out some questions for people to consider, like think about these questions, and it really has created our agenda for today. So if we look down these questions, hey, why should you be investing in procurement training? Who should you be looking to send to procurement training? How do we think about training as it complements our other services? And what does training look like for us from IT procurement and legal aspects? Those are the things that we're going to look to cover today and go through. That's our agenda for today. So to start us off with that, I had referenced some training on that last side. When I was a supplier, I got trained regularly. Eric, I know you've spent time on the supplier side as well, big part of your career. Wes, I know you have as well. I'll start with you, Eric. Wes, feel free to chime in. Can you share your thoughts on how suppliers negotiate? Like, what do they do?
Yeah, so the best salespeople know how to identify weaknesses and leverage. So if they have those two items or one of those two items in their bucket, it's going to start a sales cycle. And pricing is one thing. Over license, under license. I'm moving you from a SKU to a bundle. Of course, Wes can talk a little bit about the legal side of leverage. So Wes, you want to jump in here?
Sure. And so with regards to legal leverage, it's understanding how much risk tolerance the other side might have versus just how much risk tolerance you have on your side, and understanding each side's pain points when having that discussion concerning risk and liabilities.
So I love the responses from both Eric and Wes. And I want to make one important point here. We want to thank Wes for joining us today on this call from his family vacation somewhere across the globe. So Wes is taking time out of a vacation to participate. We really appreciate that. But Wes brought up a really important point of risk. And when we talk about deals, we talk about managing risk. And Eric brought up the other important point about leverage. So when we talk about training and how suppliers think and how they negotiate, they think in terms of leverage. They think in terms of trying to control and manipulate deal timing. And you could be asking yourself, well, how does a supplier do that? How does a supplier control timing? Well, first they ask you, when do you expect to get a deal done? But then they start to do things like Wes alluded to from the contract. They start putting in things like time-controlled responses. Hey, you tell me by X that you want to renew, or we're going to auto-renew you. That's how I can control timing. Or they may manipulate timing by signing you up for a term-based agreement. Hey, this deal is 3 years long. What happens at the end of the term? You got to do another deal. That controls and manipulates timing. Or we're all used to suppliers coming to us and saying things like, hey, this proposal is good until this day. And if you don't sign by this day, this proposal goes away and it goes up by 20%. Another way that suppliers control, manipulate timing. The other thing they do is they think in terms of what alternatives do you have to the deal? Are you looking at other suppliers? Are you looking at other deal options? Things like that. And then finally, they think in terms of, hey, how do I use those first two things? Knowing what the timing is, knowing if you do or you don't have alternatives to actually win the deal before it's closed. And if I know I've won, if I know you don't have any time, I know you don't have any alternatives, and therefore I know I've won the deal, what are we negotiating? That's how suppliers think. But what's more important is, how do they do that? Well, they do it. I referenced training on one of the past slides. When I was a supplier, we trained on the process that we needed to run to gather the right information, control activity and agendas. Eric has heard this thing called close plans from his past. We used to get clients to sign off on close plans. Hey, here's all the things we need to do to get to close. Do you agree? Uh-huh. Great. I'm now in control of the process. We get into your business and sell to those resources, not to the folks in procurement, because ultimately, if we do all that stuff well on what we're trained on, we neutralize procurement resources. You now have much less power if I have more leverage. So that's critical to think about as we talk through, training and what it means to us. So let's switch gears here a little bit. I've jumped right in and we're talking a little bit about training. Eric, I'm going to throw this back to you. From your experience, can you share some thoughts on how suppliers think about training?
Yeah, so I've had the pleasure of working at some large suppliers, and training never ends. There's always education and training. And how do you sell to a CFO? How do you sell to a business user or business leader? How do you sell to finance? How do you sell to procurement? They have a playbook on all of these plays that they run, a blueprint, so to speak. But training at a minimum every quarter, you would have at Oracle, at a minimum every quarter at Microsoft, at a minimum every quarter at EMC. So yes, they're always training you.
That matches my experience. Now, question for both of you. Wes, feel free to answer this one as well. How much do suppliers, and I'm aggregate, like all the suppliers out in the US, how much do we think they're spending on sales training? Any ideas, any thoughts?
I would think they're spending maybe $1 million a year or something, Andrew.
So Wes, it's actually a little bit more than that. And maybe $1 million per company. But the reality is, based on recent surveys that were done, we found that companies are spending about 70 billion, and this is US based companies, on sales training. And then if we look at kind of a recent study, so that survey was done by Salesforce.com to their customer base. So it's from a valid, credible source. And another valid, credible source, Training Magazine, for a time period that overlaps the data from Salesforce, said, well, overall training expenditures have grown to about a little more than $101 billion. And this is where I always like to say, well, I'm not a math major, but some simple arithmetic tells me that companies are spending over twice as much on training their salespeople as they are training everyone else in their organization. That's pretty scary. That matches what Eric said. And the other interesting thing I found when I was looking at these stats is there's no industry that spends more on sales training than IT. They're the leader of the pack in spending dollars on training salespeople. And you could ask yourself, why do they do that? Why do they spend so much on training their salespeople? Here's the reality. According to a survey I found from Task Drive, they said the return on investment, the ROI on sales training, is 353%. And that was actually at the low end, because I found other numbers that bring that number up to closer to 500%, which means for every dollar companies are spending on sales training, they're getting back somewhere between $4.50 and $6. They know the investment pays off. They know if they've got trained salespeople, they are going to be effective in getting deals that favor them. Well, what are they training on? Eric brought this up a minute ago. Eric said the reality is what they're training on is how to build playbooks that I can use to execute a deal, so that when I find a deal, I've got a process that I go through. It's structured, it's repeatable, it walks me through the steps on the information I need and the things that I need to do to get that thing to fall out the bottom of my sales funnel, favoring me. So this is what we're up against, folks. This is why we're having this call today, this discussion today, to really say, all right, how are we thinking about these things? So in one of our previous Chopping It Up sessions, Eric showed a very similar slide like this. So I wanted to bring it back, and I want to ask Eric a question here, because in relation to the training that we just talked about and kind of applying it to this slide, Eric, can you walk us through kind of what's going on here, what we're showing on this slide?
Yeah, so I'll give you a real life example here. So in May is Oracle's end of year. In June is Microsoft's end of the year. And then in July is Cisco's end of the year. And if you look at Oracle's financials, it'll show you anywhere from 38 to 42% of their business gets conducted in May alone. So here's what's going on. They're all sitting in a room, and they're identifying who's who within the business, who's my champion, who's the influencers, who's the decision maker, what's the decision maker process, who's the risk, what risk do I have within the organization, how can I show a business as usual, and then also show you a better deal for you, the client, to make sure that you think you're getting a better deal. Right? So there's a strategy. And by the way, there's this beautiful application out there called Salesforce.com that many of them use, that all of their playbooks are built right in Salesforce. And shout out to SalesHood, my friend Eli over there, because he is the mastermind in his organization that does all this stuff for the sales supplier side of it. But at the end of the day, it's about alignment, Andrew. It's all about alignment.
So this is one of the reasons why I love working with Eric, because he says stuff and like light bulbs and bells go off in my head of like, yeah, that's what I want to say. That's what I was thinking. Like Eric, he tees me up for so many great things. But with that being said, Eric, I'll ask a follow-up question. So in this picture and all that activity that you kind of just referenced that's going on right now within an Oracle and going on within a Microsoft and going on within a Cisco, on this picture, who are they targeting within client businesses? Who are they targeting?
The business units.
Oh, so we've got 3 people pictured here, but the reality is the amount of time being spent is on one of those people?
Who has the budget, Andrew? That's who they're targeting. Whoever has it's a different world now with cloud applications and the interchange of different platforms that they can run on. So many cases, it is the business unit owners who they're spending most of the time, and then the business unit will bring in procurement. Procurement will work with finance, and then they just hand everything over to procurement.
Oh, the old proverbial throw it over the fence.
Here you go,
hey,
procurement.
Go get me a good deal. Make sure I'm not spending too much. Wes, make sure there's not too much risk in the agreement. All right. Make sure it's a good contract, well priced, all those things. Sounds easy. Sounds so easy. Well, it's perfect segue because Eric, you showed us a picture that's kind of complicated and there's a lot going on. And then there is. The reality is salespeople try and simplify it. So all I'm showing you here is kind of if you're an experienced, good IT salesperson, you know this process. You've been trained on this process. You execute this process on any deal that you're working on. Something that's called MEDDIC. Like if you've ever been in sales or specifically IT sales, you've heard about MEDDIC. And it's really about what Eric just said. Hey, finding out how much do you value solutions and how do you calculate that value? Finding out who controls the budgets, creates the budgets, economic buyer. Finding out how you are making a decision. What are your decision criteria? What's the decision process that you're going through there? Those 2 things sound like stuff I probably shouldn't be sharing with salespeople, not to mention the rest of this. Finding out how much pain you've got, how bad does it hurt that something that you have to fix. And then Eric touched on these last two C's, the competition. Am I competing with anybody for your business or are you single sourced with me? And then who within your business has a track record of getting my deals done? Who's my champion? Because if I can find the right champion, the odds of me getting my deal done go up exponentially. And with very few exceptions, I can almost guarantee that champion is not coming from the procurement team. It's coming from the business. So one of the things that suppliers do is they work this process. They gather information about all those things that I just talked about so that they know whether they've won or not before you think you're negotiating. So Eric and Wes, if they're trying to win before you're negotiating, when does the negotiation start? Like, does it, it's hidden on that last bullet there of negotiate key. Like, do we let them get to the end of their process and do we hit the negotiate key and that's when it starts?
Les, you want to go first?
I would just add to that, I've seen this countless times on the supplier side where they'll engage legal as the last step. And they said, we've already agreed to all the pricing. We just need to finalize these legal terms. Well, as a supplier in-house counsel, we have all the leverage then to exert our supplier legal terms, because why would we go far from them? We've already agreed on all the pricing. The business side is totally done, and we just need to quote unquote hammer out the terms. And so when I hear that, what that means is we just need to get them to agree to our standard supplier terms or maybe a slight deviation of our standard supplier terms. That's what I hear.
Yeah, it favors us.
Andrew, I would add that the negotiation begins when the supplier has leverage. That's when negotiation begins. Once they make the initial contact with the client and they have leverage, they already have a blueprint of they know exactly what. Again, one of our guys on our team, Bob Mango, says, we're, a lot of people are playing checkers and not chess. These folks are smart. These suppliers are smart. They are playing chess. They know what margins they have to give away. They know they have an ideal plan of what not they don't want to give away. And to Wes's point, and this is why I think training is so critical and for the success of companies nowadays, is why not negotiate everything together? Why fragment a negotiation? And by the way, legal terms, market intelligence, we have it. So it's so crucial that needs to be laid out up front.
Now, Eric, you're jumping ahead because we're going to get to that point.
We are, okay.
Of what we've got. But you set me up, like you teeing me up for certain things, because you said we're playing chess and not checkers. I love it, because that's what our colleague Bob Mango talks about.
Yeah.
The reality is, in chess, you better be thinking 2, 3, 4 moves ahead, which tells me I start playing this game. The negotiation starts the minute anybody from the supplier engages with somebody from my organization, not procurement, likely the business, which brings us to where I said, Eric, you're jumping ahead, because you're thinking of how does this all fit together. So Eric, Green Cabbage is your baby. Like, you started this. And you've made a conscious decision to say, hey, you know what? We're going to bring more education, more training to our clients. How does that fit within the other services that Green Cabbage provides?
Yeah, so it starts with the thesis of what are you receiving today from the supplier, and what market intelligence do you have access to do a comparison? And the comparison is not only on a micro SKU product or service, but it's also on business and legal terms. We're not looking to address, we're not a benchmark company. We never want to be a benchmark company. We want to be able to provide our clients the best optimal in securing the best optimal contract. And that includes a heck of a lot more than just benchmarking. But where it's really critical here is you have the data. The data is not going to pick the phone up and call the client. The client needs to understand what that data looks like, so they can articulate a strategy and a plan back to that supplier and regain the narrative. Because we talked about it before, the supplier thinks they have the narrative right out of the gate. In many cases, they do. We have a lot of clients where we have to reset the button to say, you need to regain the narrative, because it's, again, for them, it's time. They're managing time. We'll talk about how you get your time back here in a minute. And then a lot of time, and Andrew does this well in his training, it's connecting the dots. Who is the decision makers? And I love the illustration furthest to the right here on the slide above executive network. Many cases, our clients are working at the RVP, the GVP, and even the SVP level. Wes and I spent a lot of time on the supplier side. Those folks have concessions, but not the concessions that you want to get as a client. You need to get above that. You need to get to sales ops. You need to get to legal. You need to start redlining. So we call this methodology compress. Some of the largest consulting companies in the world has brought this into their organizations, as well as clients of ours, and purchasing our data. And the reality of it is it's a significant time reduction in the procurement lifecycle.
And one thing I'll add to what you just said, because the thing that I've learned, Eric, since I've started working with Green Cabbage is, you said a second ago, hey, we're not a benchmarking company. Well, the reality is benchmarking is one piece to a much bigger process. Right. It's important to have the data, but what you just talked about is I better have the data, and I better know who it's going to apply to within a supplier, and who's going to be able to get to me. And that's where the training overlaps with it, being able to bring that to everybody who might need it, which is kind of, I think, the perfect segue on what we're going to finish with, which is really, we're going to answer the question, one of the final question that we started with today in our agenda of, hey, we've talked about the why, why is this so important? And suppliers play a different game and they train on it constantly. Well, what we do from a training perspective, we bring 3 critical components, or 3 what I'll call flavors of education. And I'll talk to the first 2, and then Wes will talk to the last one. The first one is kind of the stakeholder awareness. Like we showed a few slides ago, the suppliers are selling to the business. So I better make my entire team, anybody that touches a supplier, I better bring them up to speed of the game that's being played and the role that they play in it, so that if a supplier contacts them, they know what to share and what not to share and things like that. So we've got awareness to reach a wide audience within your organizations. That 45 to 60-minute interactive lecture, we try and keep them, asking questions and get it interactive. But it's meant, Eric brought up a word a few slides ago, alignment. It's meant so that everybody is working from a common foundation so that we can be better aligned as a team. Which brings us to the second flavor of education. So within our organization, we're also going to have folks that need to lead deals, whether those people are in procurement, whether those people are in IT. And those people, they need skills, they need tools, they need the capability to be able to align that team. And now everybody else should be better aware of the role they play. Then coach that team. Hey, here's what's happening. Here's what I need next. And then lead that team. And that's where the deal leader workshops come into play, to be able to give the resources that need that level of depth, much more intensive, day-long class to go through that series of classes so that we create deal leaders that align, coach, lead deal teams. And that brings us to our last thing that we've alluded to it along the way. And Wes will share a little bit. We've got legal aspects, risk aspects. So Wes, you want to spend a few minutes here?
Yeah, and it's not just what you're negotiating from a legal standpoint, it's how you're negotiating from a legal standpoint, how you're managing the contracting relationship with the supplier, how you're managing the red lines with the supplier, how you're managing the engagement and who you're engaging from a legal standpoint with the supplier, and how you're sharing, not sharing, or oversharing information with the supplier. We're going to provide legal training services to provide optimal outputs when you do engage legally with the supplier to get optimal outputs. And so we're going to continue to build and train on a program that allows folks to optimize the contracting process from a legal perspective.
And what Wes just said is why I've started to love working with Wes, because I've spent years doing this without someone like him. And Wes, the background, we didn't go into much detail. Wes is the chief legal officer, is a lawyer, and spent the bulk of his time on the supplier side as legal counsel for suppliers, and now brings that expertise to us. So I've worked with lots of lawyers, but I'm not one. Wes is. So he brings that expertise to us, which kind of brings us to our wrap up for today. Eric, I don't know if you've got any final thoughts before we open it up and see if there's any questions out there for the folks that have joined us.
Yeah, I see different maturity models across clients all the time, and what the common theme is things have changed significantly where you can bucketize your approach and your strategy. If it's a cloud agreement, if it's hardware, if it's telecom, whatever the case may be, there is a playbook for you to run, you, the client, to run. And everything starts with a comparison, market intelligence. We call it a MIT, which is it's the combination of our data set as well as strategy, as well as business and legal terms that we unpack that. But that data is great. You need to understand that, and nobody in indirect technology or contingency workforce can be an expert on everything. So having this training that gives you a foundation of a new approach, re-energize people. By the way, if you train your people, they stay longer. By the way, if you train your people, they stay happier. We've seen it. And whether you use us or not, this training is fantastic. It's going to re-energize your people and make them smarter. Because like what Andrew said before, and Wes said before, these suppliers are in training classes right now. They're getting ready for a new product release and how they're going to go out and approach that and with the market that they're serving. So you got to equal the playing field. And by the way, when they walk into a deal, they've already talked to 10 people within their organization about what the strategy is. In many cases, you're outnumbered. You have one or two people within your organization to bounce that idea off of. We're the extension of your team at Green Cabbage as well. Wes, anything to add? And we'll turn it back over to Andrew.
No, I think it's been extremely helpful. Even being a in-house supplier legal counsel for 20 years, I'm still blown away by the amount of information that emit and that folks like Eric and Andrew continue to bring to the business side of the deal. Even having done countless transactions for hundreds of millions of dollars, it's still, the breadth of that information just is astounding to me, even having practiced in-house for almost 20 years at a large tech supplier.
Well, thanks, Wes, and thanks, Eric, for participating. My final thought on today is one of the things that we're often asked by clients is, how do I get my procurement team to add more value to the organization? We hear that all the time. Well, make sure that they know what's going on and they're trained to combat what aggressive supplier sales teams are doing, and you start to add more value. We've got proof that works. So, and the other thing is, I hope that my passion for this comes across in these events. I know it's hard when we're online, but I live for this stuff, guys, like helping get better deal outcomes. I got a little birdie told me a minute ago that we didn't have any questions in the chat. The chat, I think, works if you do have questions. If you have follow-up questions that we didn't cover something, there's contact information here that you can respond to get more information if we didn't cover something that you wanted to cover or that we spurred something that you wanted to talk about. So we thank you very much for your time. I'll wait for a minute to see if any questions come in, but I'll only get yelled at slightly because I only went over by 4 minutes in our time today.
Give the control back to IT procurement is what I would tell companies. The amount of return, the EBITDA switching, the rebalancing of agreements, it's huge. We've seen it. We've seen 15, 30%. Give the control back to IT procurement and give them the support that they deserve.
So Eric, I just saw a question come in. Don't mean to interrupt, but I think this is a good one and you can answer it. What is a micro SKU? Coming to us from Jeremy Wilcox.
Good question, Jeremy. There are no such things as SKUs anymore. They're all bundles. So you have to unpack that bundle and understand what SKUs are in that bundle. We call those micro SKUs. If it's a straight SKU, we call it a SKU. A micro SKU is unpacked out of a bundle. Hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah, and the thing that I'll add to Eric, because I'm learning Eric's language. So I look at, like, when we go through training, it's transparency and detail. That's what we're getting at with micro SKUs. What do I have the transparency in the deal that I need to make sure I know what I'm buying? Because if I buy a bundle and that bundle includes 100 micro SKUs and I paid one price, and a year from now I signed a 3-year deal, but a year from now I need more of line item 3 and 5, how do I price that?
Or flipping it around. And so Dan Pavlik runs our Microsoft practice. He uses the Hello Fresh lunch analogy, which is I'm getting a bundle with 8 SKUs in it. I'm using 2 of the SKUs, but the supplier's making me buy the bundle. Well, why are you paying full value? So having that level of detail, Jeremy Wilcox, is going to give you the power to go back and get a better deal.
So any other questions? Jeremy figured out how to use the chat to throw out any questions. Anybody else have any before we wrap it up for today? And again, we know we went a few minutes long from our scheduled time, so we apologize for that.
Thank you guys for chopping it up again.
Absolutely. And look forward. Oh, final thought. Look forward. We're going to do another one of these in April, and Wes is going to be our guest of honor. He's going to talk a little bit more about that legal training and kind of what it looks like and feels like. And then in May, we're going to do one more, and I'm going to take over, and I'm going to go into a little bit more detail on that Deal Leader Workshop series and what that looks like and feels like. So, keep a lookout for the stuff coming up in the future as well. Thank you, everybody.
Wes,
really
make sure you apply suntan lotion in Brazil.
I will do so. Thank you.
Enjoy the rest of your vacation. Thanks, everybody.